Governor Marcus Holloway was a man who had seen it all, or so he thought. As the first black governor of his state, he had faced countless challenges on his journey to leadership, from navigating heated debates in the legislature to addressing the needs of diverse communities across the state. Marcus had earned a reputation for being calm under pressure and fiercely committed to justice. But today he wasn't thinking about politics or policy. Today he just wanted peace. It was one of those rare afternoons where the world seemed to slow down. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden rays through the trees that lined the winding Backroad. Crisp autumn air filled the car as Marcus drove with the windows slightly rolled down. He loved this road. It reminded him of simpler times long before he became governor. This route led to a secluded cabin his family owned, nestled deep in the woods. It was a place where he could escape the relentless demands of public life and reconnect with himself. Marcus wore an old pair of jeans and a flannel shirt, far removed from the tailored suits and polished shoes that usually defined his appearance. There were no security details trailing him today, no aides holding clipboards or whispering reminders into earpieces. Just him, his thoughts, and the hum of the engine beneath him. It felt good to be invisible, even if only for a little while. As he rounded a gentle curve in the road, the tranquility of the moment was shattered by the sudden flash of red and blue lights behind him. At first, Marcus didn't think much of it. Maybe someone else was being pulled over farther up ahead. But then he heard it, the unmistakable wail of a siren. His heart sank as he glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the police cruiser speeding toward him. Confusion washed over him. He hadn't been speeding, he was sure of it. There were no stop signs he'd missed, no reckless maneuvers he'd made. Still, obeying the law came naturally to Marcus, so he signaled and eased his car onto the shoulder of the narrow road. Dust swirled around the vehicle as he brought it to a stop, the sound of gravel crunching beneath the tires. Taking a deep breath, he turned off the engine and waited. The officer approached slowly, his boots crunching against the same gravel that moments ago had seemed so serene. Through the rearview mirror, Marcus caught sight of the deputy, a tall, broad-shouldered figure with mirrored sunglasses shielding his eyes. Something about the way the man moved set off a quiet alarm in Marcus's mind. It wasn't aggression exactly, but there was a stiffness, a tension in his posture that felt out of place for such a routine traffic stop. "License and registration," the deputy barked, his voice sharp and authoritative. Marcus nodded politely and reached for his wallet, careful to keep his movements deliberate and unhurried. He handed over his driver's license, which clearly displayed his name, Marcus Holloway. Below it, the words Governor and State Capitol Address stood out boldly. For a moment, the deputy said nothing. Then, sneering, he muttered, "You don't look like no governor to me." The comment hit Marcus like a punch to the gut, though he kept his expression neutral. He knew better than to let frustration show. Not here, not now. Instead, he calmly replied, "I assure you, I am who I say I am." But the deputy wasn't listening. His tone grew colder, more hostile. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his hand resting ominously on the grip of his holstered firearm. Marcus hesitated, his mind racing. What had started as an ordinary drive had suddenly taken a sinister turn. Why was this happening? Was it because of his skin color? Because of the position he held? Or something else entirely? The deputy repeated his command, louder this time. "I said get out of the car." Marcus complied, opening the door slowly and stepping onto the shoulder of the road. The cool breeze rustled the leaves above, but Marcus barely noticed. His focus was fixed on the deputy, whose body language screamed hostility. Every instinct told Marcus to remain calm, to de-escalate the situation. But inside, his heart pounded like a drum. And then, without warning, the unthinkable happened. The deputy drew his weapon, pointing it directly at Marcus's chest. Time seemed to freeze. The peaceful afternoon, the golden sunlight, the rustling leaves, all of it faded into the background. All that mattered now was the barrel of the gun staring him down. Marcus's mind raced. How had it come to this? Here he was, A man who had dedicated his life to serving others, standing face to face with someone who saw him not as a leader, not as a human being, but as a threat. The irony wasn't lost on him. In that moment, Marcus realized this wasn't just about him anymore. This was bigger than one man, one traffic stop, one isolated incident on a quiet back road. What happened next would leave the entire nation speechless and change Marcus's life forever. The deputy's voice cut through the stillness of the afternoon like a knife, sharp and unrelenting. "Hands where I can see them," he barked, his tone laced with hostility. Marcus raised his hands slowly, his palms open and visible, careful, not to make any sudden movements. His heart was racing, but his face remained calm, betraying none of the fear that churned inside him. Years of public service had taught him how to mask his emotions in high-pressure situations, but this was unlike anything he'd ever faced before. Deputy Raymond Haskins stood a few feet away, his gun now pointed squarely at Marcus's chest. The sunlight glinted off his badge, a stark contrast to the venom in his gaze. To anyone watching, it might have looked like a routine traffic stop gone slightly awry, but Marcus knew better. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, heavy and suffocating. This wasn't about a missing license plate or a broken tail light. This was something deeper, uglier, a manifestation of prejudice that Marcus had hoped society was beginning to leave behind. "You don't look like no governor to me," Haskins repeated, his sneer widening as if the words themselves were an accusation. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to steady himself. He needed to stay focused. One wrong move, one misstep, and this could escalate into something far worse. "I assure you, Deputy," Marcus finally said, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around him, "I am who I say I am." He gestured subtly toward the license still clutched in Haskins' hand. "You can verify my identity if you'd like." Haskins glanced down at the card, his lips curling into a snarl. "Don't tell me what to do," he snapped. "On your knees, now." The command came out harsh, almost feral, leaving no room for negotiation. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Kneeling in the dirt under the threat of a loaded weapon was not only degrading, it was unnecessary. And yet, here he was, being ordered to do just that. For a brief moment, Marcus considered complying. After all, survival was the priority. But then another thought struck him, one that made his resolve harden like steel. If he knelt now, what message would that send? What precedent would it set? This wasn't just about him, it was about every person who had ever been wrongfully profiled, humiliated, or mistreated by someone in uniform. It was about standing up, not just for himself, but for everyone who couldn't. "No," Marcus replied firmly, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "I'm not getting on my knees. I haven't done anything wrong." His words hung in the air, bold and defiant, even as the barrel of the gun remained fixed on him. Haskins's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on the weapon. For a split second, Marcus wondered if the deputy would pull the trigger. Would this be the end? Would his life, his legacy, be reduced to a headline splashed across newspapers tomorrow morning? The thought sent a shiver through him, but he refused to let fear dictate his actions. Instead, he locked eyes with Haskins, daring him to blink. "You're making a big mistake," Marcus continued, his tone measured but unwavering. "This isn't right, and you know it. Lower your weapon, Deputy. There's no need for this." Haskins hesitated, his confidence wavering ever so slightly. Perhaps it was the way Marcus carried himself, calm, composed, resolute, or maybe it was the realization that this wasn't some random civilian. This was the governor of the state, a man with power, influence, and connections that reached far beyond this dusty back road. Whatever the reason, the deputy's bravado faltered, though his gun remained aimed at Marcus. "Shut up," Haskins growled, his voice tinged with frustration. "You think you're untouchable because of your title? You're nothing but a—" He stopped abruptly, catching himself before the insult slipped out. Even in his anger, he seemed aware of the line he was dangerously close to crossing. Marcus seized the opportunity to press further. "If you have an issue with me, we can address it properly," he said. "But this isn't justice. It's intimidation, and I won't stand for it." The two men stood frozen in a tense standoff, the silence between them thick and suffocating. The only sounds were the rustling leaves overhead and the distant chirping of birds, oblivious to the drama unfolding below. Marcus's mind raced as he searched for a way to diffuse the situation. He knew he couldn't rely on logic alone. Haskins was too far gone for that. No, he needed leverage. And fast. Slowly, Marcus shifted his weight, his hands still raised in surrender. "Let me call my security team," he suggested, his voice calm but firm. "They'll confirm who I am and clear this up quickly. Everyone wins." It was a calculated move, designed to appeal to Haskins's self-preservation instincts. If there was one thing people like Haskins feared, it was accountability, and Marcus intended to ensure he would be held accountable. Haskins's jaw tightened, his finger twitching against the trigger. For a moment it seemed like he might refuse. Then reluctantly he lowered the gun slightly, though it remained within easy reach. "Fine," he muttered, stepping back half a pace. "But no funny business." Marcus nodded, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Slowly he reached for his phone, keeping his movements deliberate and unhurried. As he unlocked the screen and dialed his security detail, he couldn't help but notice the tremor in his hands. Adrenaline coursed through his veins, a reminder of how close he'd come to disaster. The call connected and Marcus spoke briefly, explaining the situation in clipped tones. On the other end, his head of security promised to send backup immediately. Hanging up, Marcus turned back to Haskins, who now looked visibly uneasy. The deputy's bravado had crumbled, replaced by the dawning realization that he had overstepped, a fact that would soon become painfully clear to the entire world. As they waited in silence, the tension between them palpable, Marcus allowed himself a small measure of satisfaction. He had stared down a loaded gun and refused to back down. But he also knew this was far from over. This encounter was just the beginning of something much larger, a reckoning that would ripple through the state and beyond. The tension between Marcus and Deputy Haskins was thick enough to cut with a knife. Both men stood frozen in their positions, the silence broken only by the distant rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of birds overhead. Marcus had just finished his call to his security team, and though he tried to maintain an air of calm, his mind was racing. He knew this moment wasn't just about him anymore. It was about setting an example, standing firm against injustice, and refusing to let fear dictate his actions. Haskins, on the other hand, seemed to be unraveling. His earlier bravado had crumbled into something closer to panic. The deputy kept glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting someone or something to appear at any moment. His grip on the gun had loosened slightly, but it still hung menacingly at his side, a constant reminder of the power imbalance between them. Marcus could see the conflict in Haskins's eyes, part defiance, part regret, and a growing sense of dread as reality began to sink in. But then, just as the standoff seemed like it might drag on indefinitely, fate intervened. A car appeared in the distance, its headlights cutting through the golden afternoon haze. At first, neither man paid much attention to it, just another vehicle passing by on this otherwise quiet road. But as the car slowed down and pulled onto the shoulder behind Haskins' cruiser, both Marcus and the deputy turned their heads, sharply. Whoever was inside, they were now part of this unfolding drama. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Elena Morales, a local journalist known for her investigative pieces on corruption and social justice issues. She had been following a tip about Governor Holloway's weekend retreat when she stumbled upon this tense scene. Her sharp eyes took in the details instantly. The governor standing with his hands raised, the deputy clutching a gun, and the palpable hostility hanging in the air. Without hesitation, Elena reached for her phone and started recording. "Put the gun down, deputy," Elena called out, her voice steady and authoritative. "This is going viral." Her words hit like a thunderclap, jolting both men out of their standoff. Haskins whipped his head around, his face flushing red as he realized what was happening. A camera, evidence, witnesses, all the things he hadn't accounted for when he decided to escalate this traffic stop into something far more dangerous. For a brief moment, he looked like a cornered animal, unsure whether to fight or flee. Marcus, meanwhile, felt a surge of relief wash over him. He didn't know who this woman was, but he recognized immediately that her presence had shifted the balance of power. With Elena filming, there was no way Haskins could spin this encounter as anything other than what it was, an abuse of authority, fueled by prejudice. The deputy's options were narrowing by the second. "What are you doing?" "Here." Haskins snapped at Elena, his voice tinged with desperation. "This is none of your business. It became my business the moment you drew your weapon on the governor." Elena shot back, her tone unflinching. "Now lower your gun before this gets even worse for you." Haskins hesitated, his finger twitching against the trigger. He glanced, back at Marcus, then at Elena, then at the phone, capturing every second of this confrontation. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. He must have realized that pulling the trigger now would make things infinitely worse, not just for him personally, but for the badge he wore and the institution he represented. Finally, with visible reluctance, Haskins lowered his weapon completely. It wasn't a gesture of respect or acknowledgement, it was an act of self-preservation. Still, it was enough. Marcus exhaled slowly, lowering his own hands as the immediate threat diminished. Though his body remained tense, ready for anything, he allowed himself a small measure of gratitude. This nightmare might not be over yet, but at least it wasn't ending in tragedy. Elena stepped closer, keeping her phone trained on Haskins while addressing Marcus. "Are you okay, Governor?" she asked, her voice softer now but still laced with urgency. Marcus nodded, though his hands trembled slightly. "I'm fine," he replied, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Thank you for stepping in." She gave him a quick nod before turning her attention back to Haskins. "Deputy, I suggest you return to your vehicle and wait for backup. Any further escalation will reflect poorly on you, and trust me, the public won't forget." Haskins clenched his jaw, clearly struggling to contain his anger, but he knew better than to argue. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he backed away toward his cruiser, his movements stiff and mechanical. Once he was seated inside, he slammed the door shut and sat fuming, his knuckles white as they gripped the steering wheel. With the immediate danger neutralized, Marcus turned to Elena, his expression a mix of gratitude and determination. "Ms. Morales, I assume?" "That's right," she said, lowering her phone momentarily. "Elena Morales. I've been covering stories about systemic issues in law enforcement for years. Never thought I'd catch one involving the governor himself." Marcus managed a faint smile, though his eyes betrayed the gravity of the situation. "Well, here we are," he said. "And I think we both know this isn't just about me. This is about exposing the truth and holding people accountable." Elena nodded, her gaze unwavering. "Agreed. Do you mind if I keep recording? This footage could be pivotal." "Not at all," Marcus replied. "In fact, I'd encourage it. The world needs to see what happened here today." For the next several minutes, Elena filmed as Marcus recounted the events leading up to the confrontation. He spoke calmly, but with conviction, painting a clear picture of how quickly a routine traffic stop had spiraled into a life-threatening situation. Every word he uttered carried weight, not just because of who he was, but because of what he represented. Resilience in the face of injustice, courage in the shadow of fear. As they talked, the sound of approaching sirens grew louder. Backup had arrived, both from Marcus's security team and additional law enforcement units dispatched to the scene. Within moments, the area was swarming with activity. Officers surrounded Haskins's cruiser, confiscating his weapon and placing him under arrest. Meanwhile, Marcus's security detail rushed to his side, ensuring his safety and escorting him to a secure location. Through it all, Elena continued filming, capturing every detail. When the chaos finally subsided, she approached Marcus one last. "Summers Copiner, thank you for trusting me with this story," she said. "People need to hear it. Not just because of what happened to you, but because it shines a light on something much bigger. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression resolute. No, thank you, Ms. Morales. You didn't just document this moment. You helped save it. And together, we're going to make sure it leads to real change. As the sun dipped, below the horizon, casting long shadows across the road, Marcus climbed into his car alongside his security team. The day had started with a simple drive, a quest for peace and solitude. But now, as he drove away from the scene, he knew his journey was far from over. What had happened here today would ripple outward, sparking conversations, igniting movements, and demanding accountability. And Marcus intended to lead the charge, not just as a governor, but as a symbol of hope and resilience. By the time Marcus Holloway arrived back at the state capitol, the video Elena Morales had recorded was already spreading like wildfire across social media. Within hours, it had been viewed millions of times, shared by news outlets, activists, and ordinary citizens alike. The footage captured every chilling detail of the confrontation: Deputy Haskins's aggressive demeanor, the gun pointed directly at Marcus, and the tense standoff that followed. But what resonated most deeply with viewers wasn't just the danger Marcus had faced. It was his quiet strength and refusal to back down. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Protesters gathered outside police headquarters in Iowa, cities across the state, holding signs that read, "Justice for Marcus and accountability now." Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags like "Stand with Marcus" and "End Police Abuse." People from all walks of life, black, white, young, old, spoke out against the injustice they had witnessed. For many, this incident hit close to home, echoing their own experiences of being profiled or mistreated because of the color of their skin. Inside the governor's office, Marcus sat at his desk, staring at the screen of his laptop. He scrolled through comment after comment, each one filled with outrage, support, or calls for action. It was humbling and exhausting to see how deeply this moment had touched so many people. Yet, as he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, he couldn't shake the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about using this moment to drive meaningful change. Elena Morales had become an unexpected ally in the days following the incident. She reached out to Marcus shortly after the video went viral, offering not only her footage but also her insights as a journalist who had spent years covering systemic issues within law enforcement. Together, they devised a plan to ensure the momentum didn't fade. They knew that while outrage could spark action, sustaining it required careful strategy and leadership. "Governor," Elena said during one of their meetings, "this is your chance to turn personal pain into progress. You have a platform no one else does right now. Use it." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I agree, but we need to be smart about this. It's not enough to demand accountability for Haskins. We need to address the root causes. We need reforms that will protect others from going through what I did." With Elena's help, Marcus began drafting a comprehensive set of policy proposals aimed at increasing transparency and accountability within law enforcement. These included measures such as mandatory body cameras for all officers, independent oversight boards to investigate misconduct, and enhanced training programs focused on implicit bias and de-escalation techniques. He also called for statewide hearings where citizens could share their stories of encounters with law enforcement, ensuring that voices often ignored would finally be heard. Meanwhile, the fallout from the incident continued to unfold. Deputy Haskins was formally charged with multiple offenses, including abuse of power, racial profiling, and brandishing a firearm without cause. His trial became a national spectacle, drawing widespread attention not only to his actions, but also to the broader issues plaguing policing in America. Testimonies from former colleagues painted a damning picture of Haskins's behavior over the years, revealing a pattern of hostility and prejudice that had gone unchecked. As the case progressed, Marcus made a bold decision. He would testify at Haskins's trial. Some members of his staff advised against it, warning that doing so might make him appear vengeful or overly involved. But Marcus dismissed their concerns. This isn't about revenge, he told them firmly. It's about truth. If my testimony can help prevent something like this from happening again, then I have a duty to speak up. On the day of the trial, Marcus took the stand, his presence commanding the courtroom's attention. As he recounted the events of that fateful afternoon, his words carried a quiet authority that left no room for doubt. He described the fear he felt when Haskins drew his weapon, the humiliation of being ordered to kneel, and the resolve that kept him standing tall despite the odds. When asked why he hadn't complied with the deputy's commands, Marcus replied simply, "Because I believed I knew that I deserved better, and so does everyone else." His testimony struck a chord with those in attendance, including the jury. By the end of the trial, Haskins was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to prison. While some celebrated the verdict as a victory for justice, Marcus saw it as only the beginning. A single conviction wouldn't fix decades of systemic inequality, but it could serve as a catalyst for change. In the weeks that followed, Marcus embarked on a statewide tour, visiting communities affected by similar incidents of police misconduct. He listened intently as people shared their stories, nodding sympathetically and taking notes. Each account reinforced his commitment to reform, reminding him that behind every statistic was a human being who had suffered unimaginable pain. One particularly moving encounter took place in a small town where a young black man named Jamal had been wrongfully arrested just months earlier. Jamal recounted how officers had pulled him over for a broken taillight, only to escalate the situation until he was handcuffed and thrown into the back of a squad car, all because he questioned their authority. "They treated me like a criminal, for no reason," Jamal said, his voice trembling with emotion. "What happened to you, Governor?" "That could have been me." Marcus placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder, his expression somber yet determined. "It won't happen again," he promised. "Not if I have anything to say about it." Back at the Capitol, Marcus worked tirelessly to push his reform package through the legislature. Resistance came from predictable corners, lawmakers aligned, with police unions argued that the measures were unnecessary and burdensome. But Marcus refused to back down, rallying support from both sides of the aisle and leveraging the public outcry to pressure opponents into compromise. Finally, after months of debate and negotiation, the landmark legislation passed. Dubbed the Justice and Accountability Act, it marked a turning point in the state's approach to law enforcement. Officers were now required to undergo rigorous training, and departments faced stricter oversight. Most importantly, victims of misconduct finally had a clear path to seek redress. On the day the bill was signed into law, Marcus stood before a cheering crowd of supporters, journalists, and advocates. Elena Morales was there too, camera in hand, capturing the historic moment. As Marcus addressed the audience, his voice rang out with pride and determination. "This isn't just a victory for me," he declared. "It's a victory for everyone who has ever been told they don't matter, for everyone who has ever been treated as less than human. Today, we take a step toward a future where justice is blind, not to color, but to prejudice." The applause was thunderous, echoing far beyond the walls of the Capitol. In that moment, Marcus Holloway wasn't just a governor. He was a symbol of hope, resilience, and the enduring belief that even in the face of darkness, light could prevail. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly be long and challenging, Marcus knew one thing for certain. The fight for justice was far from over, and neither was he. The signing of the Justice and Accountability Act marked a monumental moment in Marcus Holloway's tenure as governor, but it was far from the end of his journey. If anything, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one defined not just by policy changes, but by a cultural shift that rippled through every corner of the state. The legislation itself was groundbreaking, addressing issues like mandatory body cameras, independent oversight boards, and enhanced training for officers. But what truly set it apart was the way it galvanized communities to demand more, not just from law enforcement, but from society as a whole. In the months following the bill's passage, Marcus became a national figurehead for reform. The invitations poured in from cities and states across the country, asking him to speak at conferences, town halls, and rallies. He accepted as many as he could, traveling tirelessly to share his story and inspire others to take action. Each speech he gave carried the same core message. Justice isn't something you wait for, it's something you build. One particularly memorable stop on his tour brought him to Chicago, where he addressed a packed auditorium filled with activists, students, and community leaders. As he stood behind the podium, the weight of the moment settled over him. This wasn't just another speaking engagement. It was an opportunity to remind people that change didn't happen overnight, and that persistence was key. "Today we celebrate progress," Marcus began, his voice steady and warm. "But let me be clear. Passing laws is only half the battle. The real work starts now. It's about holding ourselves accountable, about listening to those who have been silenced for too long, and about building trust where there has been none." His words resonated deeply with the audience, especially when he shared stories from his statewide tour. He spoke about Jamal, the young man wrongfully arrested for a broken taillight, and how meeting individuals like him reinforced the importance of staying grounded in reality. "Every statistic represents a person," Marcus emphasized. "Behind every number is someone's son, daughter, mother, or father. We can't lose sight of that." As the applause erupted, Marcus stepped down from the stage and mingled with attendees, shaking hands and posing for photos. Among the crowd was Elena Morales, who had followed his journey closely since their first encounter on that fateful back road. She approached him with a smile, her camera slung over her shoulder. "You've come a long way since that day," she said, her tone warm but tinged with pride. "I'm proud of what you've done." Marcus chuckled softly, though his expression remained thoughtful. "We've all come a long way, Elena. None of this would have been possible without people like you. People willing to shine a light on the truth." Elena nodded, her gaze softening. "And yet there's still so much more to do. What's next for you?" For a moment, Marcus hesitated. The question lingered in the air, heavy with possibility. Then, with a quiet resolve, he replied, "Next? We keep going. We push harder. Because if I've learned anything these past months, it's that momentum matters. When people see progress, they believe in it, and that belief fuels even greater change." True to his word, Marcus wasted no time in pursuing new initiatives. Back in his home state, he launched a program called Bridges to Trust, designed to foster dialogue between law enforcement agencies and the communities they served. Officers participated in workshops alongside residents, sharing meals, discussing grievances, and finding common ground. At first, skepticism ran high on both sides, but slowly, walls began to crumble. By the end of the year, several police departments reported improved relationships with local residents, a testament to the power of open communication. Meanwhile, the impact of Haskins's trial continued to reverberate nationwide. His conviction sent shockwaves through law enforcement circles, serving as a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked prejudice. Training academies began incorporating case studies of the incident into their curricula, using it as an example of what happens when accountability fails. For Marcus, it was vindication, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of systemic injustice. Yet despite the progress, challenges remained. Critics argued that the reforms hadn't gone far enough, pointing to lingering disparities in arrest rates and sentencing outcomes. Others claimed the measures placed undue burdens on officers, potentially jeopardizing public safety. Marcus listened to these concerns carefully, acknowledging the complexity of the issues at hand. "Change is messy," he often said during interviews. "But doing nothing is worse." Perhaps the most profound transformation occurred within Marcus himself. The incident on the back road had left scars, both visible and invisible, that he carried with him daily. There were nights when sleep eluded him, memories of Haskins's gun flashing before his eyes. Yet rather than letting fear consume him, Marcus channeled it into purpose. He began working with mental health professionals to develop resources for victims of similar encounters, recognizing that healing was as important as justice. His efforts didn't go unnoticed. One evening, as he prepared for another round of meetings, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Jamal, the young man whose story had touched him so deeply during his statewide tour. Attached was a photo of Jamal graduating. From community college, his diploma held proudly aloft. The caption read simply, "Because of you, Governor. Thank you." Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes as he stared at the image. In that moment, he realized the true measure of success wasn't in headlines or policy victories. It was in the lives changed, however small, because of his actions. Months later, as Marcus stood on the steps of the state capitol addressing a jubilant crowd during the anniversary celebration of the Justice and Accountability Act, he reflected on how far they'd come. Behind him stood a diverse coalition of supporters, young and old, black and white, police officers and activists, all united under a shared vision of a better future. "This isn't my victory," Marcus declared, his voice ringing out across the plaza. "It belongs to each and every one of you, to the brave souls who marched, who testified, who refused to stay silent, to the families who turned their pain into purpose, and to the countless others who dared to hope, for themselves, for their children, for generations to come." As the crowd erupted in cheers, Marcus allowed himself a rare smile. The road ahead would undoubtedly present new obstacles, new battles to fight. But standing there, surrounded by people committed to making a difference, he felt a sense of hope, stronger than ever before. What happened on that quiet back road had sparked a movement rooted not in anger, but in courage. And though the scars of that day would always remain, Marcus knew they were also reminders of why he fought, to ensure that no one else would ever have to endure what he did.